stop screaming. Okay. Welcome to Getting Serious. I'm Woody Wade, your host, and my guest today is someone who knows Switzerland and the U.S. maybe better than almost anyone else in the country. Martin Naville got his law degree from the University of Zurich way back when. We won't talk about years and dates. But after getting his degree, he became a corporate banker, working for JP Morgan in Zurich and in New York. Then he got some consulting experience working for the Boston Consulting Group, where he eventually became partner and a director specializing in wealth management and telecommunications. Then for 20 years, just until last year, actually, he was the CEO of the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, which is a very influential association here in Switzerland with about 1,800 members who link the Swiss and American business communities. And they have obviously lots to talk about with all the things that are changing these days. And he was in that position, as I said, until just a few months ago. You would think that a man with that kind of a career would just retire and go live in the Bahamas or someplace. But no, Martin Naville currently still holds all kinds of directorships and board and advisory roles. Just in the field of higher education alone, he's on the Global Advisory Board of the ETH in Zurich. That's the Federal Institute of Technology. And also a member of the foundation board at IMD, which is the big business school in Lausanne. He remains a senior advisor to his old employer, BCG, Boston Consulting Group. That's always a good sign that they still like you after all these years, as well as to Morgan Stanley, Switzerland. And since 2004, he's been the chairman of the Zurich Zoo, which I guess is likely where he discovered how to work with institutions full of people with untamed energy. So I'd like very much to welcome you, Martin, to today's podcast. I think we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Really great to have me here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, my first question really is, I know that things changed very quickly, but a lot is going on in the U.S. these days. And how do you see that affecting Switzerland?
Wow, that's a very big entrance question. So first of all, nothing really new happens. America has been on the retreat towards isolationism for the last 30 years since the fall of the wall. We have heard many presidents complain about the ability of Europe to defend themselves and America paying for everything. It started with Clinton and goes through the Republican and Democrats. We have heard a lot of whining and gringing in America that America pays too much and gets taken advantage of. It took the personality of Trump to say this in a very, impolite and very outspoken way. But basically, you look at this whole thing, this is just a continuation of the development of the U.S. For Switzerland, it's very important. We'll talk about business and everything. For Switzerland, there's no alternative. It's America, it's America, it's America. It's, the largest export market. It's the largest destination of foreign direct investment. It's the fastest growing export market. It's the biggest investor, foreign direct investor in the U.S. Without the U.S., we have no zero security, et cetera, et cetera. We can afterwards go into details, but for Switzerland, for good and for bad, there is no alternative. Our bread is buttered with American butter and American marmalade, and so we should, accept this and then deal with this as we can deal with it.
Okay, but do you see any big changes then? Because, if you read the newspapers, everyone is screaming that everything is just falling apart and nothing but change coming.
There will be some changes coming, but Switzerland is a bit in a special position. We have a special relationship also in Trump 1.0. We had a very good relationship with the administration. They came here, they like Switzerland. Trump likes Switzerland. We are one of the largest investor. We are one of the largest spender of R&D money in America. We don't send white goods and other consumer goods that would take jobs away. We create a lot of jobs. Most of our exports is things that are needed for the direct investments for the factories of Swiss companies in America. We re-export a lot from the US. So we are in a very special relationship with the US. Now, the biggest risk is more that, there will be some roadkill on the way to the goals of the US, and the roadkill could be recession in Europe, could be a lot of things, and Europe is still our largest export market. If you take the EU as a whole, it's still 50% of our exports.
Sure.
The German car industry is still a very important taker of Swiss parts. So it's more the secondary effect that could be bad. I think the primary effect, there will be some indignation and some, screaming, as you said rightly. We were on a gray list of money, depreciating the Swiss franc. Never anything happened. So I'm pretty relaxed about that direct relationship with US. I'm less relaxed about what happens to the world economy with all the tariffs and everything.
Right, and that would affect Switzerland then indirectly.
Indirectly, second-degree effects of Switzerland. We are, we have a very, very international economy.
Right.
2 out of 3 francs that we earn is earned outside.
Right.
And so clearly we are vulnerable on the secondary effect, not in the U.S. directly, but on secondary effects.
I don't know if everybody realizes this, but the biggest companies in Switzerland, like Nestle or Novartis, just to pick 2 off the top of my head, I think they only earn something like 2% of their global revenues here in Switzerland, right? Everything else is
less. It's less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Yeah. I know. I mean, America is very, very important. It's, for all the large companies, it's 30-40% is done in the U.S.
Right.
And for pharma, apparently more than half of the profits is made in U.S. So there's really no alternative.
And 49% then in all the rest of the world, and 1% domestically then, right?
Correct.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So let's focus now on Switzerland, not so much on the relationship between Switzerland and the U.S., which we might come back to. What is it in your mind that makes Switzerland such a competitive economy?
I think it's not just the economy. It is really a multitude of factors. And I think the most important factor is our federalistic system, a very granular organization. So, we're the only country in the world without a head of state.
Right.
Or head of state.
Or a
it's
committee
people.
As a head of state, right?
It's a committee, yeah.
Right.
It's a head of state. We're the only country, certainly the OECD, where 75% of total tax revenue never goes to the capital.
Right.
1% of, so basically our parliament can never really make a decision. They make a law, and if 1% of the voters say, we'd like to vote on this, we vote on this. And we're the only country in the world where 2% of the voters can request a compulsory vote on a change of constitution. And so it's all very much bottom up. That means everybody's trying to do the right thing. It's not somebody getting out of bed in Berlin, in Washington, in Moscow or something, saying, today I think we're going to do boom.
Right.
So while on the one hand it gets very tricky to move, it is very responsive and very dynamic in terms of changing things that can be changed. So, for example, a friend of mine was the finance minister of Brüttiseelen, which is, a little commune, 1,000, 2,000 people. He said, look, I collect 80% of the tax revenue. I give half I give to the canton and half I spend myself. And I meet all those people at Migros on Saturday morning.
Right.
I will think 3 times what I spend. In Washington, $1 billion is nothing. There are those huge programs. And so I think this granularity and this bottom-up is very, very important for Swiss politics, but also for Swiss business, because it creates an environment of you talk to the local politician who has some power when you're in business. Even Novartis talks to the politicians in Basel very, very frequently, and they understand what the company needs and vice versa. And then the other thing is, Switzerland is so small, we had no choice than to go out. So we have, the Roches and the Zurich insurance. I mean, the big earthquake in San Francisco in 1904, right. 50% was paid by Swiss Re.
Really?
Yes. So
reinsurance.
Reinsurance.
Okay.
Yes, the reinsurance. So, Zurich is now one of the largest insurance companies in the US because Farmers Group. And so very, very early, those companies had to go out much earlier than, the Brits or the Germans who first had their domestic market and everything. For Switzerland, it was a need to go out.
Right. That goes back to what I was saying
That
before.
goes
All the growth is going to come from outside the country. Right?
And so, they have a lot of experience. They're now Switzerland, the 19th largest economy of the world, is the 6th largest direct investor in the US. We have never had mass products because Switzerland is not a mass market, and so it's it's in pharma, it's in technology, it's everything. And then we had the banks, and then we were very lucky after the Second World War. We're the only country with a non-destroyed environment and a freely floatable currency. And so we had a lot of inflow, especially of American companies coming to Switzerland, between the early 50s and the early 60s. And so that also helped, obviously. But the industrial prowess of the Swiss companies came along before, out of need. And, the Swiss franc has strengthened massively over the last, 20 years. When the euro came into effect, it was 164, if I remember right. Now it's 92, 0.92.
Right.
And the Swiss companies were obliged to do fitness training every year. So we could never be complacent.
Yeah.
And so between the granularity, the subsidiarity of the federalistic system, the very early need to move out, and the constant fitness training, that makes the Swiss companies just absolutely champions.
And would you say the same thing about, for example, a startup that would be established in Switzerland, even one that maybe foreign investors come and set up here? Would they understand that, or should they understand that?
I think they should understand that very clearly. I mean, the thing is, you don't do a startup when you grow in Switzerland. I mean, look at On. This is a very Swiss company with Swiss managers. Very quickly, they went to the US. They went to the US for the stock market. They went to the US for venture funds. But they took along the strength of the Swiss environment, the predictability, the political stability, the preciseness. I mean, we said 11 o'clock today, and I was here at 11 o'clock because that's what you do in Switzerland.
Right.
In most other countries of the world, plus minus 30 minutes is no problem.
Yes.
So those startups can take out a lot. And I think at the end of the day, where it's still very flexible, you look at crypto. I was on the board of Swiss Quote, just down the road here. We were the first European bank to have a crypto platform. We're the first European bank to also accept crypto in and crypto out with the cooperation of our regulator. So the very close cooperation with the regulator. I mean, sometimes it gets on your nerves, sure, but you can talk to those people.
Right.
It's not this huge behemoth that sits up there somewhere, but there are people you can talk to. Same thing with when you want to build a house or something in the commune, you can talk to the responsible people. It's a very close cooperation, a close discussion that is much less formalistic than in most other countries. And this is what also startup can take out.
Sure.
We had regulation for crypto companies, we called them the sandbox, which was probably also a first in Europe. Maybe
Sandbox?
Sandbox. It's a very narrow regulation for startup companies in the crypto area, which you don't have to do the whole shebang that you need to be a bank. Startups, as long as they stayed small and they tried things, they could have a very, very light regulation on the crypto companies.
Interesting. So let's just using crypto as an example. I mean, that's bleeding edge as far, not even leading edge, it's bleeding edge, right?
Yeah, sometimes bleeding, yes.
Right, yeah. Well, maybe I should have chosen a different metaphor, but the idea is that this is something that is clearly super innovative and just the opposite of what Switzerland's reputation has been for generations, which is it's a very conservative country. It's going to be, I won't say always a laggard, but it might not be the first society or economy to jump on a new idea. And yet when you see this kind of thing now, you realize that something has changed in this country in the last 30, 40 years. I don't know how long it's been exactly, but it's clear that things have actually turned around and that this is no longer a conservative country. Would you agree with that?
Not totally. I think it was always very innovative in some sense.
Right.
We're always very conservative on a few things, which, some of the social politics and all those kind of things, we were slow about the women's vote and all those kind of things. But in terms of economy, it has to do about domestic and international. Business was always international. And we were always under pressure from the world markets. We were always in competition with the world markets. We had to move fast. So you look at pharma, you look at banking, you look at, you look at Nestle, you look at BBC, which is now ABB, right? You look at, many companies, extremely innovative, extremely fast, extremely competitive. And then you come to the more domestic issues, the social things, there, Switzerland is really slow. Slow because of this granular bottom-up thing that, just doesn't allow for speed. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a bit Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In business, I think Switzerland has always been very innovative. Look at, 150 years ago, you had a very strong presence of Swiss companies in California. Well, everybody else was still, hooked in Europe.
Okay, interesting.
And so I think it's very difficult to explain this to foreigners, but I think in business, it's very open to ideas. It's very open to speed. It's less regulated than certainly Europe. It's less regulated than also in some industries in America. A lot of freedom, and then a lot of very, very strong framework. The infrastructure works. Everything's on time. It's it's predictable. There's the rule of law. So there's a lot of very good things that are enhancing the innovation speed of companies. And you look in where the world leaders in elevators, cement, food, banking, pharma anyway, the biotech. This is not yesterday's industry. This is tomorrow's industry.
Sure. Not bad for a country of 8 million.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, looking back over your, just not necessarily the entire time when you were head of this Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, but just fairly recently, first of all, is that an organization that startups typically join, or is it mainly for larger companies?
Startups are very welcome, but it's mainly for large companies because it's about economic policy.
Okay.
And you have to have a company of a certain size to understand the value of economic policy and lobbying in economic policy matters. If you're a small startup, you have totally different priorities.
No, right.
So, the chamber...
But you do eventually get bigger.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We hope, right? And then
we hope. So, for example, the sports shoes.
Right.
We invited them for a panel very early about startups and everything. And then they joined some 2 or 3 years ago when they started to be really big and really have, where economic policy starts to really bite. It's taxes, it's immigration. And we are the largest association of international companies in Switzerland. Because it doesn't matter, Swiss company, American company, German company, they all have the same issues. It's all, it's immigration, it's taxes, it's working permits, it's sanctions, it's all sorts of limitation, it's international schools, it's the capacity of the airports. They all have. It doesn't matter if you're Swiss or an American company.
It's all the things that GGBa helps organizations by holding their hand as they get set up here.
GGBa does a fantastic job. They're just much, much, much larger because they include all the domestic companies also, etc. Right. Well, here it's really only purely international company, be they Swiss, be they American, it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, maybe my question then doesn't make sense, but I was wondering if you had noticed anything that the youngest and smallest and the ones that are closest in their life cycle to being startups, if they had something in common with each other. Were they all in one particular sector, or did maybe the commonality have something to do with their leadership the qualities of their leaders?
That's a very generic one. It's difficult to compare on shoes with Climeworks, who take out CO2 out of the air, which is much more working with governments and etc. But it's very clear. it starts with paranoid people who look over their shoulder every day to see what the competitor does, and look into the cash box every day to see if there is something left.
Right.
You have to be paranoid if you want to be a real entrepreneur, at the beginning especially. Much more than afterwards. There's some courant normal, but at the beginning it's very, very difficult.
Sure.
It's the law of the small numbers. You have one client or zero client. That's a big difference.
Right.
It's the law of the small numbers with employees. You have 3 or 4 employees. If one doesn't perform, you have a big problem. If you have 400 employees, so I think it really starts. That's probably what's common with them. Is time is short, money short. You have to persuade other employees that you are it, and at a lower salary, you have to persuade investors. You have to persuade, depending on what industry you are, you have to persuade regulators, even though you don't have the brand. You come in as ABB, you get a meeting with the head regulators.
Sure.
You come in with the Naville technology venture fund.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Who's that?
Who's that?
Right.
So it's really something that, the process is very similar. The content is then very different. Obviously, if you're more in consumer goods, financial services, you're in crypto, you're in Synhelion does this sustainable aviation fuel, then obviously it's very, very different how you work with whom. But I think the biggest commonalities really is, the Andy Grove from Intel said, only the paranoid survive, and that's doubly true when you're a startup.
Interesting. Any ideas about the commonality between why they chose to come here to Switzerland? Did you have that conversation?
There is one is the generic one. I mean, it's the same for large companies and small companies. It's this thing about the framework, about the infrastructure works. You can talk to government. It's government stability.
So whether you're big or small, these things matter to you.
They matter enormously because when you're in the US, it's a fantastic market, but taxes and the regulation changes every day, especially as, in the current new administration, we see that every day there's something totally new.
Right.
They did the infrastructure the Inflation Reduction Act of Biden at 5 minutes to midnight. They were still writing by hand. They were writing some stuff into that new tax code.
Right.
That was included in this. And so they accepted this in December, and in January it came into effect. I mean, if you're a CFO, you're always, all over the place. So planability, the ability to forecast,
predictability, stability,
all this is very important, especially for startups, because they don't have enough people to really look at, fiscal, regulatory things all the time. And so for them, it's great that it is relatively smooth platform. There's enough excitement if you're a startup anyway, because of the money and the time and the technology development and all those kind of things. That's certainly one thing. And 2 is quality of life.
Yes. Right.
You bring people here, they want to stay because it's really, it is great quality of life. I mean, I've spent months or longer in New York, in Moscow, in Tokyo, in Buenos Aires, in Paris. I mean, it's great cities, but you have kids. It's not the great, it's not a great way of life. And so,
I'm actually a poster child for that. I came here in 1982 to work for a big pharma company in Basel, and I sort of thought at the time, well, I'll be here for probably 3 or 4 years. And that was 1982, and I never wanted to leave, and I haven't.
I'm also reformed one. At 23, I left Switzerland. I thought it was unbelievably boring, and I didn't want to come back till 60. And then I was pulled back many times without my clear intent. And when I came back with my wife and the little boy at 36 years old, suddenly I discovered how great this place is.
Right.
And then I decided to stay. But before, I mean, I came here. I was the first Swiss passport holding partner, BCG. They more or less obliged me to come here for 5 years, and then afterwards I could go wherever I liked. And then we decided to stay because it's fantastic. And I mean, that has a lot to say, especially if you're a startup and you work a lot. You want to have fun.
Sure.
And that a lot changed with the Googles of this world coming here.
Yes.
With a lot of international young people, which makes it a very different place than 30, 40 years ago. That really changed massively.
Right.
The internationality, and so that's also part of the quality of life. if you're a Brit or a French or somebody, a Scandinavian, and you can hear you work 6.5 days a week, and at least a half day you can go to pub, meet some interesting, fun people, and have a good time. So
Right. Well, I mean, there's a flip side to that, and I guess we should talk about that, and that is the fact that living here is expensive, right, compared to other countries.
very expensive.
Okay, all right. You said that. I didn't.
No,
but
it
it is.
So, very clearly. But the salaries are very, very good.
Right.
So I think purchasing power, Zurich, Geneva, they're still pretty. I mean, they're better than most European cities as a purchasing power and quality of life
Right.
Formula. But clearly, if you come here with money earned outside and you're a tourist in Switzerland, it's very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Got a little less expensive because everybody else has had a lot of inflation in the last few years.
Yes.
Still, it is a very expensive place. So if you just compare, an egg for an egg, it's mind blowing. If you compare how many eggs you can buy on your salary, it gets pretty good.
Right. And I think the other thing about Switzerland is that what you buy here, the quality is so high that a lot of the things you would buy, now obviously this is not true for an egg, but a lot of the things that you would actually invest in here are things that will last a lifetime. I mean, the value of something you buy is very high.
We like Swiss finish.
That's
Swiss
right.
finish is
Swiss
we take
finish.
a good product and then, there's a Swiss
With the
finish on
Swiss-
everything, on products, on regulation. We always have a Swiss finish.
Right. Interesting. Well, Martin, what else should I ask you? Is there anything else that you can think of that the listeners to the podcast would like to understand about your point of view on Switzerland and how attractive it is?
You're the moderator. And
I'm the moderator.
I would never want to take away your job.
Okay, fair enough.
I think a bit summarizing what we discussed before is it's a wonderful package. We have a few issues like everybody else. I mean, we have no idea how we should finance the additional social security that people awarded themselves last year. This is the 13th payment of social security.
Right.
We have no idea how we will finance the upgrade of our army because we are at 0.7%, which is which is pretty far away from the 2% that NATO has agreed to.
Right.
We're not part of NATO. We have a bit of a twisted or troubled relationship with the EU. There will be a lot of discussion about an agreement that is initialed but not signed yet. But at the end of the day, you look at the whole package, and I mean, this is the place to be. And a lot of people feel that. And so we have an issue with immigration. We are probably the most mixed melting pot in the developed world. About 27% of people living currently in Switzerland are not born here.
Right.
And do not have a Swiss passport.
Right.
This has nothing to do with being against foreigners. It's just how many can you have in a direct democracy before it backlashes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are complaining that they only hear English in the streets, which is not totally wrong. The good thing is
Nothing wrong with that.
nothing wrong with that. But there are some people who don't like this.
Sure, I understand.
The sense of home of, good old Switzerland is there. So clearly we have some tensions. So, but we're not. When you look at all the major European countries, you look at the problems in Sweden, we're still a lot better on this than
Right.
most other countries. And so, you can always talk about the glass half full, half empty. I would say the Swiss glass is about 2/3 full and 1/3 empty, which is, we can still complain about the 1/3 that's not in the glass, but overall, I think on most measures, we clearly outperform our competitors, and this is why it works really well.
Yeah. I think on that note, I think we'll call it a day. This has been a great conversation. I think we've covered a lot of bases, and
Indeed.
I appreciate your input on all of these fantastic issues. Thank you very much.
Great
Martin.
moderator. Thanks, Woody.
Thanks.
All set. Thank you.